Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to what we generally call these tribute episodes, the ones we actually don't like doing. But unfortunately, a lot of our musical heroes, not living as long as we'd like them to. And today is another one of those days. So today we're going to pay a little quick tribute to Paul Chapman, former guitar player from UFO and Lone Star and Waysted, nicknamed Tonka. Nicknamed him Tonka apparently because he had this kind of bulldozing nature about him. Nothing hurts him. He's built like a Tonka truck. Right, the guy was just, from all accounts, full of life, loved to live life to the fullest. He was a party animal. He was a very headstrong guy and a very talented guitar player that passed away yesterday. All right, June the 9th. On his birthday, actually, on his 66th birthday. As of yet, they have not announced the cause of death, but that really matters not right now. It's more a time to think back and reflect on the life of a very good musician, a very notable character who played a part in a couple bands that near and dear to a lot of people. I know there's seeing all sorts of sentiment all over the internet this morning from folks who met him and been around him and maybe interviewed him and all this kind of stuff. And nothing but great things to say about Mr. Chapman, about what a great human being he was. So for me, I can only reflect on the music, as I never got to meet the man, unfortunately, but some really good stuff. So he was actually, like I said, passed away yesterday, 66, born in Cardiff, Wales. All right, back June 9th of 1954. So kind of got his start. You know, he had been busy playing in music quite often during the early 70s. He actually replaced Gary Moore for a brief time in that early Irish hard rock band Skid Row, not to be confused with the American hard rock band, right? So Skid Row eventually asked to come in and help out a bit in UFO during Michael Schenker's first tenure in the band, but actually did not appear on any albums. He would do some filling in live and what have you, because of course, you know, Mr. Schenker kind of came and left a lot of times. There was a very interesting relationship between him and the rest of the band. So Mr. Chapman, Paul, was actually kind of always on reserve for quite a long while. And it wasn't until the late 70s when Michael kind of flew the coop for good at the time that Paul Chapman was actually asked to come in and join the band full time. But we'll get to that in a minute. So first, his first kind of big band, so to speak, I guess not really a big band, but notable band was this band called Lone Star. And he appeared on 2 albums with them. First self-titled Lone Star, and the other one's called Firing on All 6. Some other notable characters in this band. So you had Kenny Driscoll on lead vocals on the first album, Paul Chapman on guitar, Rick Worshop on keyboards, Dixie Lee on drums, and Tony Smith on co-lead guitar, and bassist Pete Hurley. Okay. On the second album, you had a guy named John Sloman on lead vocals. Okay, John Sloman, of course, also went on to sing with Gary Moore and Uriah Heep briefly. Here we got Tony Smith and Paul Chapman on guitars, Rick Worshop on keyboards, Peter Hurley on bass, and Dixie Lee on drums. Really good, solid, hard rock. Solid hard rock, melodic. Little bits of prog going in there, little bits of boogie, all that kind of stuff, but a very, very decent band that never really made it big, but I think, you know, going back and listening to this stuff now, actually the Lone Star records are both pretty damn strong. I always liked them quite a bit. So like I said, you know, you fast forward, this is, 77, 78, I believe, 76 and 77, so shortly thereafter, you know, this band kind of implodes, and all of a sudden there's trouble brewing in the UFO camp once again. So the UFO guys, Phil Mogg and company, are like, hey, Paul, we're not really sure what's going on with Michael here. Could you kind of come in and we can't find him? Can you fill in for some shows? This, that, and the other thing. Well, eventually, you know, Michael leaves officially, all right, and he goes off and forms the Michael Schenker group, and the guys are without a lead guitar player. So the obvious choice was to ask Mr. Chapman to come in and be their full-time guitar player. And it was actually a marriage that worked out for 4 straight studio albums, 4 very respectable albums. So, you know, I know when most people go and look back at the career of UFO, everybody always goes back to those mid-late 70s albums with, with Schenker as the absolute classics. But you know what? The early to mid-80s albums with Paul Chapman are extremely underrated. Both really different guitar players. I think one of the things that's great about both of these guys, both Schenker and Chapman, both really unique players that don't sound like anybody else. And, you know, they could have gotten in another guy who had that kind of like German, East European kind of flair like Schenker did, but no, they went for a guy from the UK who had a very kind of, I don't want to say basic because it wasn't basic, but he had a very original bluesy rock tone. He could get metallic when needed, but he just was a really tasty player that didn't really sound like anybody else. Okay, maybe he wasn't overly flashy and kind of like exuberant like Michael Schenker was, but he didn't have to be. And I think the style of the music that they wrote with him in the band kind of worked out in their favor. Much more kind of down to earth, gritty, hard rock. You had some blues came into play during this time period, something they really weren't doing during the Schenker years. Okay, you had Phil Mogg was really into Bruce Springsteen, so you had kind of like more of that kind of like I don't know, like urban type of rock and roll, so to speak, you know, kind of telling tales with songwriting, okay, had a little more textures to the music, more of just kind of regular rock, you know, hard rock type stuff. So the first album they did together was No Place to Run. Okay, of course, produced very famously by George Martin. All right, maybe not a great fit. This is great songs on this album. I've always said, and we're not here to review the catalog, but more to talk about kind of the albums he appeared on and talk about him. Some great songs on here. I think maybe for me, the production by Mr. Martin is a little bit too squeaky clean for UFO, but some fantastic songs on here. You've got Mystery Train, okay, The Fire Burns Tonight, Young Blood, Money Money, No Place to Run, the title track, Alpha Centauri. Here we've got Paul Chapman, Mr. Tonka himself, with the UFO guys officially for the first time. Very solid album with some really great songs. For me, though, I tend to always go to this album. The Wild, the Willing, and the Innocent. This was a pretty big deal right when I was a kid when this album came out. And, you know, probably the heaviest of the four albums that Tonka recorded with the guys from UFO. You got Chains, good heavy rock tune, kind of bluesy, kind of metallic, right? You got Long Gone, great vocal by Phil, grinding guitar work on here. You got the title track, It's Killing Me, another gritty, passionate rocker. You got Making Moves, which is a great heavy tune. Okay, he was really good at cranking out some riffs, and his solos were, you know, like I said, maybe not as virtuoso and sprawling as Schenker's. Definitely different, though. Definitely more like kind of gritty and from the gut, so to speak. What else? You got Lonely Heart, Couldn't Get It Right, and Profession of Violence. Definitely a great song. Probably for me, my favorite album with Paul Chapman on it, out of all the stuff that I've heard. Mechanics. Okay, another pretty solid record. Okay, here you got, again, more, I think the influence of Springsteen on Phil's writing style is really creeping into the music big time. Not as heavy as an album as the one that came before it. We Belong to the Night. You got Back Into My Life, The Writer, Something Else, Doing It All for You. Strong album, not very heavy, unfortunately. And then we've got the Making Contact album. Always kind of dug that album cover art. I actually like this a little bit better than Mechanics, I think. Diesel in the Dust is really good. Blinded by a Lie, No Getaway, Fool for Your Love, When It's Time to Rock. And here you can see, kind of small, but there's Paul Chapman with his trusty BC Rich bitch guitar, which he played quite a bit during his tenure in UFO. Also would play, I believe he was playing Gibson Explorers and Firebirds. I think I've seen him with a Strat or a Les Paul here and there, but he really, most of the live photos you'll see from him in this area, he's playing that BC Rich guitar, which kind of was like his trademark there for a bit. So after leaving UFO in the late 80s, right, he eventually hooked up with Pete Way once again in Waysted for a couple albums and tours and things. Some of their later albums, I actually don't have any of those. It's kind of hard to get some of those Waysted albums, those later ones. They're not very prevalent on CD. Hard to track down. But, in more recent years, he's done all sorts of different projects. He did like a Southern rock project about a decade or so ago. He had his own, let's see, what else? His own band, Killer Bee, right? He played with Gator Country, which was kind of like a bunch of guys from Southern rock legends, Molly Hatchet, so on and so forth, doing some kind of Southern rock covers. And, in recent years, he's been kind of keeping a low profile, doing guitar lessons online and all that sort of thing. So, maybe not a superstar guitar player. When most people talk about their guitar heroes, all the usual suspects always come up, right? Very often you hear Paul Chapman, but Paul Chapman, I think, is one of those guys that everybody always has something good to say about. Everything he's ever appeared on is just rock solid, very, very strong, and he's just one of those guys that he's like, I get the impression he never wanted to be like a star of the band. He wanted to be kind of like one of the players, right, that helps make it all happen, but seemed like a really cool guy, big personality, big riffs, biting solos, tasty player. You could always count on him, and I think that's how he's going to be remembered based on a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing, a lot of the statements from people. It's like, just a overall really good guy who was just a great bandmate, all-around good player, and contributed mightily to everything that he did. And so, you know what? Sometimes that's all you can ask for, right? It's all you can ask for. So go out there and listen to some Lone Star, some Waysted, some UFO today in memory of Paul Chapman. Tonka, you'll be missed. Hope all's going well up there, and we'll see you again sometime, right? So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on the mighty YouTube all the damn time. Coming up, days ahead, ranking the studio albums of Frank Marino, ranking the studio albums of Gary Moore, top 10 songs of Gillan, ranking the studio albums of Voivod, all sorts of things happening here at Sea and Tranquility, so you don't want to miss any of it. So we'll see you guys real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.